You get used to a certain kind of loneliness out here. Long-haul trucking gives you a lot of quiet. Too much sometimes. But I've always liked that. No boss breathing down my neck. The radio blasting. I'm a female. I've been doing cross-country hauls for almost 17 years. I've seen it all. Accidents, animal strikes, co-workers picking up prostitutes, many folks sleeping in vehicles where they shouldn't. But this was different. This was the first time I genuinely thought I wasn't going to make it to the next stop. It started somewhere outside of Laramie, Wyoming. I was 2 days into a solo run from Portland to Chicago. Nothing unusual. Just a box trailer full of parts for some manufacturer. I'd stopped to refuel at a quiet little station off of I-80 around 2 a.m. I pulled in, filled up, grabbed a coffee. The place was empty except for a white panel van parked in the far corner, facing the pumps but not using one. I didn't think much of it. I figured someone was sleeping or waiting for a ride. I finished up, rolled out, and got back on the highway. About 10 minutes later, I noticed the van behind me. At first, just headlights in the mirror. No big deal. You see a lot of late-night traffic, but something was off. The van stayed with me. I mean exactly with me. Every lane change, every turn onto a new stretch of highway, it followed, keeping a steady, deliberate distance. By the time I hit Cheyenne, it had been behind me for nearly 2 hours. I slowed down, hoping they'd pass. They slowed too. I sped up. So did they. It was subtle but deliberate. Every move I made, they mirrored. I started getting that tight feeling in my chest. The one you get when your instincts are picking up on something that your brain hasn't quite named yet. I called dispatch, asked if they had a location for any way stations or patrol cars nearby. They said the nearest one was another 60 miles out. I decided to test the van. I took the next exit, a small service loop leading to a rest area and a turnoff, with nothing but an old diner and closed gas station. The van followed. I circled the lot. The van pulled in and parked at the far end. Engine running, lights off. I didn't stop. I got right back on the highway. It was still behind me. That's when I called 911. The dispatcher was calm. Took my information, GPS location, vehicle details. I told her everything. The white panel van, no plates visible. That it's been behind me for nearly 3 hours now. She stayed on the line and radioed local units. Said they'd get someone to intercept a few miles up. Then she asked, "Do you know why they'd be following you?" "No," I said. She paused. Then she said, "Have you had any kind of confrontation recently? Anyone threaten you?" "No. Just me, the road, and this growing sense of dread." We set up a plan. I'd take exit 122, where an officer would be waiting in a parking lot. I stayed on the line the whole time, trying not to panic, trying not to look in the mirror every 10 seconds. The van stayed with me the whole way. Right up until about a half mile before the exit. Then it turned off its headlights. I shouted that into the phone. He just killed his lights. He's still behind me, but dark. I felt like prey, like I was being herded. I took the exit, and sure enough, there was the cruiser, lights flashing in the lot. The van didn't follow. It kept going, dark, back onto the main highway. The officer pulled me aside and took a full report. I gave every detail I could. He radioed ahead, but the van never showed up again. No plates, no identifying marks, no cameras on that stretch of road. It was gone, like it never existed. But that wasn't the end of it. 3 days later, a detective called me. He said the van had been found, abandoned, on a logging access road in Nebraska. Plates were fake. Inside they found a pair of binoculars, a police scanner, a set of bolt cutters, duct tape, a rifle, and a manila envelope with printed screenshots of me at multiple truck stops, fueling, entering bathrooms, loading up. But the photos were time-stamped across 2 states. The detective asked if I knew the man registered to the van. I said no. They wouldn't tell me much, just that I wasn't the first driver he'd followed. But maybe, I was the first one to notice early enough. I don't do night hauls anymore, and every time I see a white van on the road, even in broad daylight, my hands still tighten on the wheel. Because whoever he was methodical. He followed me for hours. He studied me, and he didn't want to pass me. He was waiting for the right moment to do God knows what. This story happened back when I was in college. I lived in my state's capital, going to a 4-year university that was named after said state, and living in an apartment. I had no car, but since the campus was just a 20-minute bus ride away, and about 60% of the residents in the 1,000-plus unit complex were students at the college, the buses were fairly constant and convenient. I had a bike, but mostly used the bus, or I walked everywhere. My class schedule was a combination of early evening classes, with 1 or 2 early morning classes depending on the semester. This was common practice, as many students had part-time jobs during the day. I wasn't much different. Between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. Monday through Friday, I had a part-time assistant position at an accountant's office, mostly managing the 30-foot by 50-foot file storeroom they had. Because of the schedule, I often spent my weekends working on homework and projects, and would run errands like grocery shopping when I got out of class at 10 p.m. The city buses stopped at 11 p.m., so usually for errands it was a one-way trip. My roommate and I tried a few different arrangements, but he was absolutely horrible at knowing what to get. After he spent $150 of my money on groceries for the month, and came home with $150 in booze, I decided to just handle the grocery shopping myself. This quickly became a routine on Wednesday, because I would spend an extra 30 minutes after lecture looking over the professor's notes. This was applied physics, and every little detail was helpful, so most of the students that were of the same major did the same. I would take the bus to a local competitor to Walmart, which was open 24 hours, do my shopping, then make the 3-mile walk home around 11:30 while carrying groceries. Along the way, there wasn't much. Just a few car dealerships, some apartments, and a few bars. It's at these bars that I would typically stop. There were about 2 miles into the trip, and oftentimes I would go in and get a drink. Since I was 18, I was allowed inside the bar but could not purchase alcohol. Fine with me, they had sodas too. After making this trip a few times, I started to pick a specific bar to stop at. Because the guys were nice, no one messed with my groceries, and honestly, I wasn't objecting to the view. You see, the bar was a gay biker/leather bar. Yes, I'm gay, whatever. The bar was set up with an open courtyard in the front, with a large awning that opened the courtyard to the street, and a great view of the river across the street. They had these thick plastic curtains that could be pulled across to cover the bar's interior during the weather, for events or the day. However, with the heat, the curtains were wide open, and fans were blowing non-stop to keep the space from becoming a sauna. On the night in question, it was a real horrendously warm and muggy May night. The kind of night where it feels like you're breathing water instead of air. I stopped at the bar and ordered my usual root beer. The bartender popped an IBC open for me, and I slowly drank it, letting myself cool down from the heat. I ordered 2 more and hung around almost 30 minutes, chatting with 2 guys inside the bar. It was Wednesday night, and the bar was pretty dead, with only 6 or 7 customers besides myself and the bartender. One of the guys I'm talking to is fairly straightforward, but I turn him down. It was already late for me, and I had a class at 7 a.m. Plus, I could tell he'd been drinking fairly heavily, not something I find particularly attractive. I exit the bar with my 4 paper bags of groceries and start to walk down the street. I make it about 50 feet before I see bright red and blue lights around me, and a police cruiser whoops at me. I stop and turn around. A 30-something male police officer exits the car and asks me what's in the bags. I tell him just groceries and offer to show him the receipt. The police officer snatches the receipt from my hands, looks it over with his flashlight, then puts it in his pocket. I politely ask for it back and explain that I need to settle up the grocery bill with my roommate. He says it is evidence and then demands to inspect my groceries. I'm starting to get exasperated, but I set my bags down and allow him to look through them. I don't have anything perishable, and everything is either in a cardboard box or a plastic bag. The officer rifles through the bags, taking everything out and setting it on the sidewalk. At first I thought he was just counting each item to match to the receipt. When he has the last few boxes, he pulls out a pocket knife and uses it to rip open a box of rice. "Hey, what are you doing?" I shout loudly. The police officer replies with the most matter-of-fact tone I've ever heard. "I am searching them for drugs." I stood there blinking for half a minute while he proceeded to destroy the 5 boxes of rice, some mac and cheese boxes, and a bag of beans, before saying, "Why would you think there are drugs in sealed boxes of food?" The police officer ignores me, so I take out my phone and start taking pictures. He hears the shutter sound and demands I hand over my phone. I reply with, "No, I'm recording a crime, destruction of personal property." The police officer loses it. "Give me the phone." Also calling me a homophobic slur. He charges at me, grabs my shoulders, swings me around, and shoves me down on the hood of his car, sending my phone skittering into the street. He then proceeds to announce that I'm under arrest for transporting drugs, going to find the evidence wherever I've hidden it, followed with another homophobic slur. He then proceeds to pull my pants down, underwear and all. The next few actions happened so fast, my elbow rocketed backwards, smashing into his nose and shattering it. I then pull my pants up in time to turn and see him at his feet and pulling his gun. I reach out, grab his wrist mid-draw, pull his arm down and lunge behind him. His arm violently snaps, and he lets go of the gun. I then hurl it into the river. I turn around to see him screaming into his radio, calling for backup to deal with a fucking tweaker. I walk over to my phone, pick it up, and called 911. The 911 operator answered. "911, please state the nature of your emergency." I proceeded to tell them, "I've just been sexually assaulted by a cop, driving Unit 284 while at 1224 Hudson Street. He's calling for backup on his radio. I broke his shoulder while escaping his assault. He ripped my pants down in the middle of the street after destroying my personal property, which I have pictures of him destroying. His gun is now in the river. I know this call is being recorded so it can be used in court, which it will be. Do you understand?" The 911 operator is silent for 10 to 12 seconds, which I used to allow myself a few breaths. "I understand, sir. Our protocol is to dispatch the officer's sergeant to the scene. Do you see his badge number or name?" I replied that I did not. However, there was another police car 4 to 5 blocks down the street, and with what little time was left, I wasn't going to get any closer. I told her to send whomever was the most senior police official on duty at the time, and that I was going to call a lawyer. I then hung up right as the second police car arrived, and a mid-50s-something officer with a stereotypical police mustache got out and pulled his weapon, telling me to freeze. I had already set the phone to auto-dial, so I raised my hands to show I was unarmed, and then the officer lowered his weapon and began to approach. Before he did, the phone was answered and I put it on speaker. I then said, "It's Luke. I'm at 1224 Hudson Street. I've just called to request the police chief to my location because an officer has sexually assaulted me. By now, the second police officer is within 5 feet of me, and his face turns as white as a sheet when he hears the voice that came out of my phone. I want the officer's name and badge number, and I want you to put him on the phone. I am also on my way. The voice is clipped and very official, despite being well past midnight. I hand the phone to the police officer in front of me and motion for him to hand it to the first police officer. The second officer brings the phone to the first officer without question. The first is leaning against his cruiser, moaning about his arm and nose, and answers the phone with, "Who is this?" The voice on the phone calmly explains, "This is District Attorney Carter. What is your name and badge number?" See, my grandfather was the chief of police for the city I grew up in, only 30 miles from the city I was in now, and he had held regular events with everyone within law enforcement for the local departments. Everyone loved and respected him, and he reciprocated by being a mentor to many of them, all whom called him by his nickname, Muzz. One of them was a young ADA for the county, who was now the city DA. She'd actually lived only a few properties away from my grandfather, and was a regular fixture at family events. By now, 2 more police cars are coming down the street, and the second officer is starting to look like he's going to mess his pants. Meanwhile, the first officer is explaining everything to the DA, who calmly listened to everything, then instructed them to stay there until she arrived. She ended the call with, "And anyone who touches Muzz's grandson before I get there won't have a job anymore." I stood around for 30 minutes while the police talked amongst each other about what had happened, and took statements from the bartender and patrons of the bar. It turns out, they all saw the whole thing. The chief of police arrived in his own vehicle, and he started to talk to the first officer, who was sitting in an ambulance. Moments later, the DA arrived. I grew up with this woman. She knew me, and I knew her. She took one look at the boxes of destroyed groceries on the ground in front of me, then marched up to the officer and demanded to know what search had been authorized. She had a look on her face that would have made a grizzly bear back down. The chief tried to explain that the officer had believed I had drugs in my possession and was searching my person for them. She listened to this, then pointed to the police cruiser. "Let's see what the dash cam shows." Turns out the cruiser had a 4-way dash cam, giving it a nearly 360-degree view of the vehicle's surroundings. It showed the cops staking out the bar for over 2 hours before I had arrived, immediately pulling up to me as I exited, and the whole search. Chief tries to explain that the officer had gotten tips about drug dealing at this bar, and that he often sees illicit activities here. When the camera showed the officer pull my pants down, she said, "That is sexual assault. I don't care if it's supposed to be a search," which was conducted improperly and extremely inappropriately. The officer is in the wrong. Anything done after the fact is self-defense. The chief tries to explain that the officer will be disciplined, but that my actions were excessive. He says the EMT thinks the officer's arm is broken and his shoulder is dislocated. She, however, replies with, "I don't care." She then turns on her heel and approaches me. "Are you okay?" I replied that I was fine, just tired, pissed that this guy would attack me. I asked why, and she said, "Let's ask him." We walk up to the officer, still in the ambulance, and I said, "I wasn't doing anything wrong. You saw the receipt. I was only carrying groceries." He clearly looks like he's been given some pain meds, because his face looks like he's about to giggle. But my question makes him look me straight in the face, and he says, "It's obvious you're gay. I've seen you go into that place with bags," he said, almost spitting his words out. "You aren't very good at hiding what you're doing. That place only survives on party drugs, and I know they're dealing. You were just the obvious person to be taking the drugs to the school." I just looked at him stunned and turned to walk back to my groceries and pack them into their bags. The DA then offered to drive me home. Along the way, she asked me, almost as a formality, if I wanted to press charges. I said I did, and asked her what I should do. She advised me that she would press charges against the officer on behalf of the county for the illegal search and the assault. I thanked her, and she said she would make it hurt. It turns out, the bartender had recorded the whole thing on his smartphone, and he turned that over to the DA as well. Combined with the dash cam and the fact that the whole search was completely founded in the officer's homophobic beliefs, the DA destroyed him in court, where he tried to fight that it was a legitimate search for drugs. The judge did not buy it, and neither did the police union, who dropped his legal counsel after the first part of the proceedings. In the end, he settled for 5 years in prison. Rather than risk a trial, he would undoubtedly lose. The day after his sentencing, however, his reality got even worse. You see, the state I lived in had been working on an anti-discrimination law, which included protection for gays and lesbians, and adopted it while he was on trial. Under the new law, automatic civil action was to be taken against him by the city because he had committed a crime based on a discriminatory act while acting on behalf of the city. The city did file the suit, and guess who was there to meet him in the courtroom the day after he was sentenced? You guessed it, my grandfather's friend, the DA. I was sitting next to her as she watched him enter, and her face turned into the Cheshire Cat's, complete with the wide, toothy grin. I still remember how he looked so scared to see her again. Once again, she destroyed him in court. The hearing was a massacre for any defense the officer could have made, and before the judge even got to see the footage from both the recordings, the officer's lawyer proposed a deal for a $50,000 punitive payment, plus legal fees and damages, and settled the case. I didn't care too much about the damages, as I would only get the cost of the destroyed groceries back, unless I filed my own civil suit. But I did make an arrangement with the DA to send a photo album of me spending the $25 in damages for the destroyed groceries on buying identical replacements, just so he would know that I had, in fact, purchased them at a grocery store. I even got the store clerk at the checkout to pose with me as she rung them up when I told her the story. I am a hunter. I like to hunt wild boar specifically. Though I have been deer hunting and have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, I mostly hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I've been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that costs literally twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it on was worth it. But I did it. I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy-to-find spots that I could set up in that overlooked a large, easy-to-navigate clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot I'd seen days earlier. Probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbits or owls. The deer that I'd seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night, but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 p.m., and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up, maybe setting up a target before I left, and taking some practice shots. I heard a crunch come from the direction I came from before. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you'd see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a bit. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear. It was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that a game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up the road from where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sights and noticed that he was naked. No shoes, pants, or anything. I remembered being disturbed by his movements, like a squirrel or something, twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree, the one I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then he did something I still have nightmares about today. He squatted and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it, a voice coming from that direction, a very compelling female voice. "Help, I'm lost," it said. There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. It went against everything I'd been taught about firearms. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? "Help, please, I can't walk," the voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk, when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. So good, I mistook him for a bear. That's a fucking trap. This guy's trying to lure me to him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't give a shit in that moment. I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction, and I swear I saw a smile. The thermal scope has an effect that makes animals' eyes appear white. How the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. "Fuck off," I screamed in that direction. He stood upright, and it hit me how tall and skinny he was, easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. What would I tell the cops? I was unwilling and unready to shoot someone. He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. "The next one will fuck you up. Go away," I shouted. He stayed on all fours, and this time I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass, like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling, and knew that my voice had cracked a bit on that last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted left toward the tree line opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope, he was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck, and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab, but kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone, and I never received an update. It wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him, because the spot we were camping was technically the same forest I'd seen the bastard, just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked his mom, my cousin, had to take him home. She was really pissed. I've gone down the rabbit hole on these scary stories. I'm not saying what I saw definitely was a wendigo or a skinwalker. I'm saying that if such a thing exists, I may have dodged quite the bullet that night. Or maybe it was just a tweaker being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. Either way, I thought I'd share this. This story from my past happened about 32 years ago in East Texas. My mom and dad divorced when I was 16 years old, and my brothers and I lived with my mom. My dad visited us once in a while, but not really on a consistent basis. He was a gambler, one of the reasons my parents split up, and he tended to not come around when he was broke, but on the rare occasion that he won big, he would visit and spend money on us and then disappear again. My dad said he had a job as a shuttle driver for a local hotel. He told my brothers and I that the shuttle driving was just a cover, that he actually worked for organized crime, which he claimed owned the hotel. He said his real job was to drive out to various places in the area to pick up fugitives running from warrants or otherwise wanted by law enforcement, bring them to the hotel to hide, and then later they would move on by means my dad said he didn't know. My dad was always a blowhard and always exaggerating or flat out lying, so my brothers and I just blew it off and didn't think much of the claim until something strange happened. My dad disappeared. It was 1988, and I was 22 years old and a college student still living at home. I worked as a full-time disc jockey on the overnight shift, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., at a local radio station. My middle brother was 19 years old, lived in an apartment with a friend, and worked at a nearby Dairy Queen. My youngest brother was 9 and lived at home. One day my brother called my mom and I and asked us if we knew where my dad was. He says some men came to the Dairy Queen while he was at work and asked him if he'd seen my dad recently. My brother truthfully told them that he hadn't seen or heard from my dad in months, and that he often does that. He cuts off contact for months at a time. My brother said these men didn't say who they were, but they seemed satisfied and left. My brother wondered if these men, or anyone, had called to talk to us and ask us where my dad was. We also had not heard from my dad in months. The following day, my brother says the men returned to his work, and this time flashed badges and claimed to be FBI agents. He says they were very aggressive and demanded that my brother tell them where my dad was. My brother kept insisting, truthfully, that he didn't know where my dad was, that the last he heard, he worked at a local hotel as a shuttle driver. But the experience upset him, and he called my mom and I again. Upset, my mom called the hotel where my dad worked. The man she spoke to said my dad had disappeared weeks ago, and he had no idea where he went. The following day, my brother was at work when his roommate called and said that someone had apparently been in their apartment. The roommate claimed that when he got home from work, he found the sliding glass door open and the place ransacked, but that nothing appeared to be missing. My brother, very upset, went to his apartment and found that in fact, his address book was missing from the breakfast nook, and a teddy bear he recently bought for his son, and a photo of his son were missing from his bedroom. Now, My brother and my mom and I were beside ourselves with anger, fear, and paranoia. We went to the local FBI office to complain that the FBI had done this, and to tell them once and for all, my brother does not know where my dad is. Well, as you might have guessed, the FBI claimed no knowledge of the event and claimed that they were not looking for my dad. They said none of their agents had contacted my brother. Furthermore, when my mother told them my dad had claimed that he worked for organized crime, the FBI would neither confirm nor deny that the hotel had ties to organized crime or that there was an investigation going on. My mom called the hotel again and told the manager that the men were looking for my dad, that they were terrorizing my brother, and flat out asked the guy if there was any truth to my dad's claim to be working for organized crime. The man left and told her, "There's no such thing as the mafia." While we were trying to make sense of all these weird details, we kept wondering why my brother was being harassed, but not my mother or I. That's when I was reminded of a weird event I had happened to me about 2 or 3 weeks prior. Because I worked overnight, I was often wide awake in the middle of the night on my days off, with nothing to do. One night, I went to the local TV company where my friend worked as a computer system operator to hang out with him for a few hours and bullshit a bit. At about 3:30 a.m., he had a big computer job to do, so it was time for me to go home. So I left. As soon as I pulled out from his company's driveway, the car was immediately behind me, tailgating me. I mean, he was on me so quickly, it scared the shit out of me. The car seemed to just appear out of nowhere. He also had his high beams on and was blinding me. I couldn't make out anything about the car behind me. I couldn't see inside to see how many people were in there, what they looked like, or anything. I couldn't even see what kind of car it was. I changed lanes to let the tailgater pass, but he changed lanes with me. I moved again, and he moved again. He was tailgating me and blinding me, and now seemed to be following me. I stopped at the intersection and got in the left turning lane, with my signal on, and he got behind me. Since there was no other traffic at all anywhere around, when the light changed, I zoomed across the intersection, streaked across all the lanes of traffic into the far right lane, and went through the intersection, trying to lose him. He followed me. Now it was absolutely clear he was for sure following me. I cut into a nearby neighborhood and tried to lose him, but he kept following me anyway. I finally managed to zoom back out to the intersection and crossed over and went to the 7-Eleven at the corner. I jumped out and ran inside and yelled to the clerk that someone was following me. As I did, I saw the car that was following me cut through the parking lot of the 7-Eleven, and for the first time, I got a look at the car. It was a late model, tan-colored four-door, and there were 2 white guys in it. The clerk just blew me off and said I was exaggerating, that it was probably just kids messing with me, and to let it go. I left, but I was still spooked by it, and I didn't want to go straight home. I was afraid they might follow me, and I didn't want them to know where I lived. So, I went to my workplace. I knew that the disc jockey on the air tonight would be my friend Paula, so I decided to go visit her on the air for a bit, to hang out and calm down. I told her what happened and hung around for about 2 hours. She also felt it was probably just some punks being jerks, and that calmed me down. But when I got home, now over 2 hours since this car harassed me, the damn car was at my house. As I was coming down the street to my apartments and about to turn right, I saw the damn car pull out of my apartments, and as it passed me, the sons of bitches flashed their high beams on and off at me. It was them. What the fuck? I panicked and called Paula at the radio station and told her what happened. She was freaked. She was like, "Oh my God, why would they wait for you at home? Who is this? Call the police." I was freaked out as to how they could possibly know where I lived, why they would wait 2 hours for me, and then when they finally saw me, flash their lights at me and just leave. I mean, what the hell? But now, remembering that event and putting it together with my brother's FBI visit and apartment break-in. It seemed obvious that it was all tied together. I hadn't thought about it before, but now I remembered. My car was actually my dad's car. He gave it to me about 2 months earlier when he got a new one. So if someone had been looking for my dad, they might have thought I was him. And when they saw me coming home, realized I'm not him and just left. But who was messing with us and why? Where was my dad? Why are these strange people harassing us? My mom, my brother, and I went to the local police and filed a missing persons report and a complaint. We spoke to a very nice detective. About 5 days later, we got a call from the detective. He had solved the whole strange case. It turns out, my dad disappeared because he owed his employers more than $50,000 in gambling debts. The detective confirmed that my dad did work for some unsavory characters, but they weren't organized crime per se. He had no idea if my dad was shuttling fugitives or not. He said my dad was hiding out in Nevada, and that he spoke to him, and he was alive and well, but hiding. We asked, then who the hell were those men, and why were they bothering my brother? The detective explained that it's not uncommon for unsavory bounty hunters and debt collectors to impersonate law enforcement and call and harass people. My brother asked, how did they get in his apartment? The detective said a sliding glass door is easy peasy to open, and they probably stole the address book, hoping it had my dad's contact information in it. They stole the teddy bear and pictures to use to scare my brother, which worked. I asked the detective why the men only harassed my brother and not my mom and I. The detective said, because my dad had used my brother as a reference on his job application at the hotel, and he gave my brother's address and phone number. The FBI agents probably figured he was close to my dad and either maintained contact with him or, if threatened, would contact him. So, my dad eventually turned back up in town. He acted like nothing had ever happened. He never spoke of the incident, and we never brought it back up. I guess he got the money he owed them. I don't know. But that's my story. Thanks for listening. Ever since I was a kid, I remember my grandma denouncing horror of any kind. Ghoulish Halloween masks, haunted houses, scary movies. I had attributed this aversion to her background and faith. She's Hispanic and a devout Catholic. She believes anything horror-related is wrong, evil, you name it. So imagine my shock and curiosity when my grandparents shared a bombshell. Back in 1974, my grandpa convinced my grandma to see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This would be her first and last scary movie. The weekend after the movie, my grandpa, grandma, my then toddler-aged mother, and my aunts and uncles decide that they will go horseback riding for the first time. Since everyone lived in Wisconsin, my family made the journey to a farm about 2 hours away. For the most part, everyone is in high spirits. Who can say no to a family adventure on a crisp autumn Wisconsin day? Despite the others' excitement, my grandma is worried. She said she doesn't care for horses. She chooses to stay behind on her own with my mother. When my family arrives at the farm, it's 3 o'clock. According to my grandma, she watched everyone get settled up and then slowly ride off into the tangle of trees. The guide leading my family called out that the ride would last less than 2 hours, mentioning different trails, the need for breaks, things of that nature. My grandma figures everyone will be back by 5 o'clock. She waits with my mother in the car, playing games, reading storybooks, and trying to silence her bubbling anxiety. Needless to say, 5 o'clock comes and goes, no sign of my family. By this time, my mother has fallen asleep, which leaves my grandma with no way to distract herself from her worries. Finally, when 6 o'clock rolls around, she calls to a farmhand from her car window. No way is she leaving the safety of her vehicle. She demands to know why her family hasn't returned yet, when 5 o'clock has long since passed. By now, darkness has begun bleeding into the Wisconsin sky. The farmhand assures her that everything is okay and that extra paths are taken throughout the ride. He tells her that her family should return soon. Now, keep in mind, this was well before cell phones were a thing. Also, a week before, she'd seen her first scary movie, and it had scared the shit out of her. At this point, my poor grandma feels like she's living out a scene from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. She tries to contain her worry and begins a hushed, fearful prayer, until the flash of lightning that is soon followed by ear-splitting thunder. The noise wakes my mother, who starts to cry. My grandmother must now not only ponder the frightening question of where her family went, but she also has a stressed, howling 2-year-old to deal with. It is now reaching 7 o'clock. The storm is growing more ferocious by the second. My grandma has to pee, and her bladder feels like it's going to explode. But between the roar of the storm and the images of the crazed country maniacs playing her mind, she refuses to leave the vehicle. She plans in her head that if they aren't back by 7:30, she's going to leave and find the nearest gas station to phone for help. Again, no cell phones during these days. 7:30 comes. Her family hasn't come out from the woods. As she's scrambling around the car for keys, she realizes my grandpa never gave them to her. The pound of a fist against her window shakes her from her whirlwind of panic. That panic amplifies by 1,000,000 when she notices a sizable, brawny man peering in at her. He's wearing a jacket and a hood covers his head. My grandma says that, by now, it felt like someone had pushed a button and sent the whole world into slow motion. Everything crawled by at a snail's pace. "Why don't you and the little one come inside?" the man yells. His words are authoritative and carry no hint of warmth. He isn't speaking from a place of concern. He is ordering my grandma into the farmhouse. All my grandma can do is shout, "Where is my family?" The man responds gruffly, "We're looking for him." My grandma orders him to call the police. The next words the man said made my grandma literally piss her pants. "We don't need the police." As he turns to go back into his house, he says, "You and the baby can come inside whenever you're ready." My grandma starts to sob, wholly convinced that her family has been brutally murdered and that she and her baby will be next. In the chaos of this moment, she hears someone calling her name, but because of the pitch-black darkness and her profound fear, she knows she must be hearing things. Then she hears her name again, this time even louder. "Dora, help me." It's my grandpa's voice. When she realizes this, she puts my mom in the back seat, grabs the wooden baseball bat my grandpa kept under his seat, locks the doors, and then exits the car. "Keep calling my name. I can't see you," she cries. After what feels like an eternity, she follows my grandpa's voice to his location. When she gets to him, she realizes my grandpa needed help because he's guiding my aunt across the high, rain-soaked grass. She hurt her ankle. They are both drenched from mud and rain and covered in scratches. The rest of my family is nowhere in sight. Before my grandma can assume the worst, she hears my uncle calling for my grandpa. One by one, everyone shuffles out of the wild woods and through the tall grass. Everyone is soaked in mud and injured in some capacity. Cuts, gashes, limping, unsteady. All are shaken as well. When they finally make it back to their vehicles, the sound of running engines and the flood of headlights gets the attention of the man inside the farmhouse. The farmhouse door swings open, and the brawny man comes to stand on the porch. With an amused chuckle, he drawls, "Oh, you all made it out of there." My grandpa shouts, "That dumb asshole left us out there and never came back." All the man says in response is, "I'll have to talk to him about that. You all can come inside." His freakishly flippant and joking attitude sinks into his words. He knows damn well they aren't going into his house. My grandma begs my grandpa to leave and get them all out of there. With that, my family tears out of there as fast as humanly possible. Once my family was back home and safe, my grandpa explained what had happened. During the ride, the guide led them deep into the woods to a creek where the horses stopped for a drink. As the horses rested, the guide told my family he had to go do something and would be back in 20 minutes. My family thought this was strange, and my grandpa even anxiously joked, "You're coming back, right?" The guide simply gave a low chuckle and took off on his horse. 20 minutes came and went, and the guide didn't return. My family continued to wait as they had no idea where to go. They could see the sky blackening above them. They would have to make it out on their own. As my family rode off, they tried to remember the path back to the farm. They wandered aimlessly. Eventually, rain started to fall. Pulsing lightning and the crash of thunder spooked the horses. Everyone but my grandpa got thrown off their horses. When my grandpa climbed off his horse to help the others, his own horse galloped away as well. From there, it was a nightmare trying to navigate the woods while wounded and roaming through a thick void of darkness. The only advice I can give you is this: if you're going horseback riding, you better make sure it doesn't become a horseback ride from hell.